Void. Hi guys, welcome back to Devil's Advocate. I'm here with Trace McLean Lowe. My name is Alana.
Hi, and I'm here.
Yes, there she is. That was actually a relatively good transition. You popped up pretty quickly there. Yes, we decided to jump back on here because we haven't had a Devil's Advocate podcast in a while, have we? I can't remember when we last did Devil's Advocate.
I think it was last year.
I think it's been a good year now. Since we
Sometime.
touched on
Yeah.
since we've touched on the more sort of serious subjects, if you will. So today we are discussing.
Today we're discussing many things, basically history and what we don't know.
Yes. In a
And
nutshell.
coming from South Africa
Yeah.
and not being a big history buff at school, my history back in the day was even more limited than it is now.
Yeah.
So I'm heading here to Cape Town. That is the very first castle or the protection, it was supposed to be the battalion. They kept all the military there down in the Cape Town, built by Jan van Riebeeck in they arrived in about 1632. It took a while to build it and stuff, but that was it, Table Mountain behind, they could see the sea, and if anybody came and wanted to kill them, boom, 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 everybody died.
Oh my goodness. So how old is that infrastructure?
That structure is, we're looking at the 20th century now. It's a good 3.5 centuries old. That's right.
Oh, okay.
350.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the Dutch arrived in South Africa first, and my first sort of like idea of what history was the South African history, as in the Dutch having arrived, the British having arrived, the French having arrived, having all big Barneys and finding out through the Boer War. We did all of that kind of stuff. I knew later on in high school there was more about kings and queens of Britain.
Yeah.
But I was so bored. History did not excite me at school. So what about you?
Yeah. Me neither, actually. History along with like geography was always sort of the more boring classes that I dreaded. But once I got older and actually left secondary school, as over in Canada, high school, when I left and I started my job more as an actor and I was getting into performing arts more, that's actually when I took a keen interest in it more, because we were doing these sort of plays on stage from the Victorian period, like A Doll's House. I don't know if that's Victorian period, it might be a bit older, like A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting how the women were looked at in that time frame and how it was so different. And then that's when I'd like sort of tumble into history a little bit more, actually. But I think it's just when you're younger in general, you want to do the more fun things at school, like art or drama, or like maybe if you're a sportsy person you want to do PE. But yeah, same as you, I just didn't really take to history in school.
But what history did they teach you?
Yeah, honestly, I was similar to sort of what you were saying. I felt like I was quite sheltered from the other history in the world because it very much focused on the history of Britain, just solely the history of Britain, the monarchy, the royals throughout the years, Henry VIII, the battles that we won, So it was I didn't really know a lot of history about the rest of the world. It was more very much to do with England and the battles that we faced and what wars we won and all that jazz. Maybe we touch on the events as well, like the bubonic plague in the 15th, 1600s, or we talk about the Great Fire of London. But yes, it was mostly battles and all that jazz. So yeah, very, very sheltered. Yeah.
Now you're sort of like British born, right?
Yeah.
But that is not your total heritage, is it?
No.
Unlike mine.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a bit of a walking contradiction because I was born and raised in the UK, but my mother was from Canada, and that's where our Indigenous side is. So we are part Ojibwe or Ojibwa, however you want to pronounce it. There's like a whole other war and how it's to be pronounced as well, or Anishinaabe. And again, I didn't really learn any of the history with that. In fact, I actually learned more history from my sister who works for Aboriginal Legal Services, and she's actually able to teach me more through her job. And I find it so fascinating and interesting now, but I'm very late to my sort of learning of my culture, learning of my heritage. And even I can be a little bit naive or a little bit ignorant in the native community because I don't know. Nobody really taught me anything.
Well,
about
you
it.
know, you say that. I was born British, but
I
I
was
was
about to
raised
ask,
in
yeah.
South Africa, right?
Yes.
And while at high school they might have taught us some British history, I got most of my British history from my mom and dad, because my mom and dad were both born British, came from Britain, and they'd both lived through World War II.
Yes. Yeah.
So I got that kind of history, but they didn't have much education according to the time then either. They didn't need to go to school past the age of 15. So
Yes.
their history was probably just as limited, or as we know our queen, and that was me. You know, that was me. I know my queen. I'm British.
Yes. Yes. That's it.
I mean,
Exactly.
I
I
arrived
mean,
in the country feeling like a total, who am I and why am I here? Because I felt so South African by nature. All my history that I knew was South African, Dutch, but a little bit of English thrown in here somewhere. I mean, you got to know that eventually the English landed.
yes.
People like me were there before I was there. So, yeah. Um, and you learn about the history. So we had like a Boer War in South
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
We had a couple of them actually. And after they'd sort of like, they didn't really separate much. Well, they had separated by after World War II. So that by 47, South Africa had its independence from, to a degree, and it became totally independent in 61. That was when it got its total Republic of South Africa type thing. But of course, 47 was also the year of apartheid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that came in, and suddenly the Africans of South Africa were suddenly second-class citizens. And
Mm.
now primarily it became very Dutch orientated. The church was Dutch orientated. So they lost out long after the fact. I mean, they'd had a lot of battles and wars and stuff like that, but they'd come out the other side looking towards a relatively decent future, because while the British was there, apartheid wasn't a thing. Apartheid only
Yeah.
came in after the Dutch literally decided to rule, and that was in 1947. So yeah, there'd been wars, there'd been battles. I mean, one side, the Dutch, or the Boers, the farmers, who'd been there a couple of hundred years by that stage, were fighting with the Zulus and that.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
Hottentots were quite happy to work for the Dutch when the Dutch arrived, but they employed them. They didn't
Yes.
enslave them. The Bushmen or the Khoisan didn't want to work, so they just buggered off back to their native areas and just went on about their business. And the
Yeah.
Dutch worked very, very closely with the Cape Bound Hottentots,
Mm-hmm.
which is where the Cape Coloured originally comes from, because
Oh, okay.
they
Interesting.
mixed very early. You know, you're
Yeah.
talking about the 17th, 18th century. The Dutch and the Hottentots were getting married, you know, they were, kids. It was perfectly legal until 1947, when it wasn't.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was a bit weird for them, I'm sure. It would have been weird for me if
Yeah.
I'd been in their shoes.
When did you move to South Africa? You were quite young then, or?
I was 6. It was 69 when
Oh,
I moved
six.
to South
Yeah.
Africa. So
Yeah.
I knew nothing about anything. You know, I was just moving to another country. My parents were plonking me here, and I didn't want to go to certain schools.
Yes.
Ones that had nuns in. I was scared of nuns. But you know, we at the same time in 69, German Southwest Africa, which you can see up there in my top right, left hand corner, that was taken over. Southwest Africa was German held until after the war, Second World War.
Yeah.
And it became Southwest Africa, and Britain said, okay, fine, you look after Southwest Africa now that you're in charge of South Africa. So it was kind of like a protectorate of South
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
But again, it is still very German.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people have moved there, but it's still very German in nature.
Yeah.
And they now operate as Namibia, of course. It's not Southwest Africa anymore, it's Namibia.
It's very interesting that, how I can't remember what the sort of word is I'm looking for, when a certain area is sort of taken over by a new group of citizens or people, how much, that infrastructure changes and how it influences just the lifestyle there, the people, it's so interesting to me.
Well,
And
here's a time when immigration wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Said, "Oh, we need people to go to our new colonies. Will you leave?" And they had nothing where they were, so they left. Or,
Yes.
especially in South Africa, they had a free choice to leave. Not like Australia, where a large percentage of them were shipped over there because they were criminals, of which I should add,
Mhm.
one of my family members may have been among them.
No, there you go. But
you
that's
know,
actually quite
so, and
interesting.
a long, long time ago in a history I have no freaking clue over. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, South Africa was very different because they didn't enslave them.
Yeah.
They didn't ship them off to other countries. In fact, the only people, and they weren't really enslaved, it was called indentured. It
Hmm.
was when Britain went to India
Oh, okay.
and they wanted to start sugar farms in South Africa.
Hmm. Hmm.
So they took indentured workers from India. And that's how the sugar and the Indian people from India landed up in Natal, which you can see. Oh, there we go. On this, where is it? There you go. It's on the right hand side here of me. In Natal, Durban, that was the big sugar plantation, and they now have a really large Indian contingent of people. And when it comes to curry, the only thing that is better than maybe that can match Indian curry is Natal curry, Durban curry.
Oh, yes. As a Brit,
They do a good curry. And
yeah, as a
Chel's on
Brit,
the
we
beach
love
with
our curry.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, yeah. I've always been fascinated by South Africa. It's always one of those countries that I've wanted to visit. And I'm more in as I grow older as well. It's again sort of talking about the history and everything. As I get older, I'm wanting to learn more about cultures, architecture, cuisine and stuff. When you're younger and you're traveling, you don't really care when you're a kid. You're just like being a kid, just running
Yeah.
around, jumping in the pool. But as you get older, you're like, I want to go and learn about the history of this place. I want to learn where this came from, why it's the way that it is now, yada yada yada, and even like learn about the people. Like that would be so cool to see different tribes, and even if there was like a chance to like speak to people, like backpack and stuff like that. Everyone's like, I want to go to these big touristy, glamorous places, take all the Instagram photos. Like, look at me, look what I am, and it's just like I don't want to do that. I want to go backpacking and live in communities, go to villages, see
Oh, there
how.
are still quite
Yeah,
a few of those in areas around South Africa, and some of them
yeah,
are more touristy than they're still living there.
yeah,
But you can, as you're traveling through, you can see where they're still living a more African cultural life with their houses. And they do have some wonderful sort of like paintings and very colorful. Their clothing is very colorful as well.
that's beautiful. Were you
So,
ever exposed to sort of indigenous like tribes and stuff in South Africa? Did you ever sort of like,
no, I mean, here's the thing. We were taught English and Afrikaans. In 1976, the Soweto riots were about being taught in Afrikaans. I so understand that. I wouldn't
yeah,
want to be taught in Afrikaans. It was my second language.
yeah,
But the African tribes weren't taught in their traditional languages unless it was at home with their parents or within any religious ceremonies they may have had in their shamans and stuff. To the point that when they went to the mines, they created an entire new language called Funigalo.
yeah,
How do you spell that? I'm not 100% sure. But it is a mixture of just about every Black South African language we have. Zulu, Venda, Xhosa, Sotho, yada yada. There's 11 of them, right?
yeah,
Okay, at least 11. And then they brought in the Dutch, the French, it's all this big commingling. And we did go to see the mine dancing where they do some traditional Zulu dances and stuff like that.
that's pretty
That was,
cool.
and we drove past them, their houses, as we were traveling anywhere in particular,
Yeah.
specifically towards the north of the old Transvaal.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because then you're going up into Venderland, you're getting closer to Zimbabwe, which was Rhodesia. And that's
Yeah,
another history as well. Rhodesia has its own history with the British monarchy and the governments and stuff like that as well. But let's get off
yeah,
that's the Boer War thing, and then this is the British. So it doesn't really matter where they specifically went to, whether it was in South Africa or whether it was in Australia. Let's take a look at that hat. We're ready to beat you up. But
yeah.
Australia, again, is very different to South Africa. I mean, I don't even know enough about that. But Australia was created by the military, not the monarchy. And the Aborigine
Mm.
was totally left out of the equation.
Yes, yes,
And the
true,
only reason
true.
why the Europeans were there was because that's where they were going to send their prisoners who'd picked up a loaf of bread or stolen a loaf of bread or a penny off the street. That was the
There
crime.
you
That
go.
was how low down the system of crimes these crimes were.
Yeah.
It would get you
Yeah.
said shipped off to Australia to farm
And
land for the military.
that's the thing, like, you know, with this sort of conquering all these new places, everything is a lot more westernized now. You know, we're seeing a decline in, you know, Aboriginal languages and tribes, and, you know, because when they went to all of these different countries, they taught them English and they taught them their way of living. And, you know, so a lot of those old cultures and old ways of living got kind of washed out in a way. So it's
They
almost,
did.
yeah, it's, a lot of history probably isn't really there anymore because everything's been so westernized and sort of washed over by you know, the English and stuff. So, you know, even my culture and my background, a lot of people don't even speak the Ojibwe language anymore. And why would they
No,
need to?
I hate to
Because
do
they
this to
just,
us,
yeah.
but we have to end this particular prize because we might be hitting overtime. So I'm going to stop the
Okay.
recording here, and
Yes.
we will be back shortly. Promise.
We'll be back with part 2.
Go.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Devil's Advocate. Picking up from where we left off, we were talking about the Indigenous peoples and different countries, and we were talking about Australia. So, yeah, speaking of sort of losing that Indigenous culture, or not really losing it, but having it more westernized. I think that's more of the route that I'm going to. Like, there's still Indigenous peoples there, but when the British came, sort of made them learn English and made them learn their ways of living and all that jazz, right? So yeah, a lot of cultures sort of died with that, or
Well,
sort of what
some
were
of
washed, I
them
think they washed
did.
out.
Some
Yeah,
of them did, especially the Aborigines. I think they were given a really hard deal because they didn't have the monarchy involved. And
yeah,
delve into that. We'll be going on to that a little deeper in a minute. But the Maori themselves, and I believe this is the one for my Maori, down in New Zealand, they were
yeah.
a very organized indigenous group of people. Now, I'm not quite sure of the intricate details. I still have to do more research on this. But their deal was a lot better than what anybody else got. So they can't be infringed upon. They were just more well organized. They weren't like the First Nations or of America, for example, who were selling off Manhattan for a bunch of beads.
Yeah.
Or they didn't have the Aboriginal problems whereby it wasn't of the monarchy, it wasn't done under the name of the king or the monarchy. And they had no treaties that were signed. It was just the military that moved in and dumped a bunch of European or British, mainly prisoners, became prison island, you know. So, and Canada is always more interesting in the fact that they did have treaties, but the treaties are all with the British monarch, not with the Canadian government that came out as a result of them moving here. So, yeah, I mean, going on to all of those things, it's just, let's go, for example, here.
Yes.
Now, I'm not quite sure if any of those emblems and symbols are of a specific tribe. I am too ignorant of the topic to discuss.
So am I. I wish I could be one of those people that say, "Oh yes, that's the tribe of the blah 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 plains and the this and that." But like I said, I'm just quite ignorant to native culture within myself because, like I said, you know, growing up in England, it wasn't something that we learnt about. It wasn't something that we studied. You know, in that sense,
You call
yeah.
us being of mixed First Nations and British. You call yourself what, Metis? Am I correct?
Um. Well, I just sort of refer to myself as a Anishinaabe, you know, and that's sort of the general sort of term for it.
What, for Ojibwe or Metis?
Yeah, so Ojibwe. So yeah, my reservation, if you will, is based on Manitoulin Island. We are with Wikwemacon. So yeah, and there's lots of like so many different native bands. So we've got Wikwemacon, Metis or whatever. There's just so many, you know, and it's very specific to that sort of region. You know, you've even got like the Inuit, however you pronounce it, you know, in you know, there's so many more influences we're seeing of native descent, which is really delightful to see actually, and we're seeing a lot more representation in the media. And they're using it in a good way. They're using it in a positive way, you know, like I'm missing Indigenous Peoples Day, Orange Shirt Day, for the missing and murdered Indigenous children in residential schools. So there's a lot more positive movements, and a lot of some people, they kind of go like that, like I don't want to hear about it, I take no responsibility for it. But you've got some people of native descent who are like, no, we need this day, we need to be aware of our culture and our history and what this day really means. You know, there's even battles, you know, between people. Like sometimes I'm like, I want to celebrate Canada Day, and then sometimes I see things like, oh, genocide, rape, pillaging, and I'm like, oh, maybe I don't want to celebrate Canada Day, you know. So I'm always like on the fence with do I go over here more, do I go over there more, like
yeah, I get you, because I'm a bit torn. Being British,
yes,
I epitomize everything that everybody hates about the British nation for whatever reason. But at the same time, I realize that they've separated us from the rest of the history that Britain has to offer.
Yes.
Whether we like it or not, as Brits, it is our history. And it did spread across the world. We had India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa. And, you know, that's just naming a few of them. I mean, they went everywhere.
Pretty much, you know.
I mean, they said the sun never set on this. So kind of like around the globe, there they were. But what I find very interesting, I'm going to go back to what's behind me here. In this particular area, we can see where the treaties have all been signed. And this is all your treaty queryable areas, because queryable, that sounds terrible, that word. As in you can question it. You know, they've got all these sort of, they're all with the monarchy and not with the government, which means essentially the government of Canada cannot be allowed to run roughshod over these particular, I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yes.
This wasn't done with it wasn't done with the British government. It wasn't done with the Canadian government. It was done with the monarchy under Queen Victoria, I think, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you take a look at these, to them, this is still their land.
Yes.
And this, now, I know that as far as British politics is concerned, our monarchy has got to keep its little dirty nose out of there. Well, it's got to not make its nose dirty in that mud pool that we call our politics in Britain right now. But they don't have that same limitation in Canada.
Yes.
I mean, they do with the Canadian government, but since the Canadian government has no dealings with treaties, my theory is that the monarchy should be involved. Maybe only in Canada, because that's only where these treaties really exist and still stand today.
Yes.
This is a point where they should be able to come in and say, you're a Canadian government, you can't do this. I'm not quite sure how it works. Plain honesty here. I don't know what the intricate details are for all of this. But I would imagine, you know, you can't actually have them dealing with people who didn't do their deals with them.
True. Yeah. I think it's still interesting, you know, when you sort of speak of those treaties and those lands, you know, there's you know, we call it the reservation, and for those viewers who are from different countries and who are watching this, reservation was basically a small bit of land that the British or whoever was conquering at the time said, here's your land, but you can live on this small section of that land.
Well,
so that's kind of
I don't think it. Within the British monarchy, what they said is they could, the First Nations would get anything that was unsettled. And when the government came in to start doing things, they started settling on what was treatized land. Yeah. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
This is the learning that we're still doing for many of us who don't go and get our degrees in British rampaging across the world. And we've also got to remember that, granted, you've got a lot of dead people from the residential schools.
Yes.
There's all of that they've got to sort out. But a lot of but that was, again, Canadian government following American government, not British, not a monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
They chose to follow somebody outside of their remit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was definitely an American import, residential schools.
Definitely.
And
that's,
the church itself, this is where, again, while it was British, it was the church. And again, the church in England is attached to the monarchy. But at the same time, which one of these churches and residential schools did it? Was it the C of E or the Anglican Church, or was it just the Catholic residential schools? That I don't know yet either.
Yeah.
Because if it was the Catholic residential schools, that came from the French.
Mm-hmm.
British are not Catholic. They did not bring Catholicism to Canada.
Mm-hmm. And that's, it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people, because you're right, it's religion. It was like,
it was religion. It wasn't the monarchy. It wasn't even government. The government might have said, yes, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
They weren't actually in good, and they made sure people sent people there, but they literally had no oversight, no control of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
So literally, it is the Catholic Church, if it's only the Catholic Church that did this, but then has to do the apologizing. They're the ones that have to do that for the residential school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it is. And by rights, if the C of E or the Anglican Church from Britain did the same thing and killed children and they ended up dead or sodomized or whatever the case might be, then that needs to be dealt with, again, by the monarchy. The only problem that comes now is all the missing people we've got now, because that's literally got nothing to do with anything, especially British, because that's now. The Brits have long gone.
Yes.
As far as that goes, that is something that seems to be a little unique. And on that point, we're probably going to have to sign off here as well.
Yes.
So this particular one. So moving forward, there's going to be a lot more questioning and a lot more people to interview. This is just the start.
This is just the start.
This is to show how much we don't know.
This is the very, very, very beginning of it all, as we dive down into
We're diving into basically the Canadian treaties. We just wanted to highlight the differences between all the colonizations around the world. They are not all the same. They are not all equal.
Yes.
And we need to deal with them separately and individually.
Absolutely.
So on that note, we'll sign off here for these 2 episodes of Devil's Advocate. Please do, pardon me. Oops, like and subscribe.
Subscribe, share.
My slider
never worked.
Never worked.
And
so I have to do everything by hand.
That's okay. And we will try, I guess we've been more focused on our Tea and Taboos channel, but we will be shedding more light on these Devil's Advocate episodes with more material for you guys down the road.
Months.
Absolutely.
We'll get back to the other one in November.
Yes. Thank you
very
so
much for joining us.
And have a great day.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.